Yo, what is up everyone? We'll be reviewing the best shonen anime. This anime will be Overflow. Wait, yeah, without further ado guys, roll that. What? Wait, this isn't the alt account? What? This is Bleach Unbound, right? We're doing What If Ichigo was Shinji's son, part 1. Oh, that's my bad. Fuck. Alright, pretty much without the whole confusion that happened earlier, we'll be doing What If Ichigo was Shinji's son. I know this kind of sounds, it feels weird saying it, but it's like Shinji is like completely different from Ichigo in just every aspect. So like making him his son and all that just feels weird. But pretty much, guys, what will be happening is instead of Ishin being there to be saved by Masaki, it would be none other than Shinji. And I'll be going over that in this, like today, and for this What If Ichigo was Shinji's son. I'll be taking it to like, we're like somewhere around where Rukia comes in. I'm gonna be going over a lot. So without further ado, guys, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Alright, so like I said, we start this What If before even Ichigo was born. Pretty much what would happen is about 20 years before the events of Bleach, or somewhere around there, Shinji had been kind of growing used to the lifestyle he was in by living in the warehouse with his former captains and lieutenants like Hiyori, Love, Rose, Hachi, Lisa, and did I miss anyone else? Mashiro and Kensei. They had all lived together as a group and pretty much put down their hollows and put them into the deep end of their soul. But there was a consequence to that. Shinji used to communicate with his Zanpakuto, I believe his name. I think it's her name, since usually like the Zanpakuto sounds like the translation sounds more feminine, but the Zanpakuto name was Sakanade. So obviously Sakanade had talked to Shinji, obviously inverted language, so like all the words were like backwards. So obviously Shinji had to grow accustomed to this when he had first unlocked his Shikai, or unlocked his Zanpakuto, and he had even tried to communicate back with Sakanade. He had truly missed his Zanpakuto, his other half. He had tried everything he could, with Urahara, and he tried his best. Now he could communicate with her and use Sakanade to its fullest, especially in coercion with pretty much equally with his hollow mask. Like he can use his Bankai with his hollow mask to give it a huge amp, due to him accepting himself, in a sense, accepting that he was obviously a Vizard. So pretty much what would happen is one day he said he was just gonna go outside and purify some hollows. As he was going outside, he had suddenly come upon a weird looking hollow. This hollow was more like Vasta Lorde type, and he was confused. Why would a Vasta Lorde be in the world of living? There's, obviously, that hollow should have more intelligence to not even come here, due to the influx of Shinigami coming to Karakura town. Obviously, he had felt a weird presence from the hollow. The thing is, it had a Shinigami presence. As Shinji would widen his eyes, it was almost as if the hollow was like him, but opposite. It was hollow with Shinigami elements, but instead of Shinji being a Shinigami with hollow elements. As Shinji would quickly realize what he was fighting here, as he would swipe on his mask, as he would then try to subdue the hollow using Bakudo, as he would then point his finger at the hollow, as he would then say, Bakudo number 61. Rikujo Koro. as about like 6 bars of light would slam into Ichigo. I was about to say Ichigo. Slam into White's mid-sight, keeping him in place. But suddenly he would roar out, as just the presence alone would just shatter the Bakudo. As suddenly he'd get backhanded into a wall. Shinji would then start taking a few deep breaths before then, putting a foothold in the air, as he would then say, "Collapse, Sakanade." A ring would form at the bottom of his I think it's the handle of the a sword. I forgot what it's called. It's the Sube. It would, like a ring would form around it as he would start spinning it. As obviously his aroma would come out, like a scent would come out from the sword. As obviously a White would definitely start to smell it, as he would be kind of transported to the inverted world. Now, after he had pretty much went into Shikai, the hollow was falling under his hypnosis. For a few minutes, Shinji was like slashing at the hollow, but something weird would happen. On the wound, there'd be a huge like bubbly substance that would form, and the wound would just close. And obviously, Shinji realized he would have to end it in one attack, that he couldn't regenerate something that was so major, as if he would cut his like body into just slime, not slimes, but like sludges of just flesh. So pretty much Shinji would then put him to another Bakugo, adding more Bakudo to it, doing 61, then 62, 63, 75, 79, as he was pretty heavy Bakudo. He was like taking deep breaths and all. He wasn't as good as Hachi or Tessai when it came to Kido, but he had a captain's presence. He should at least be able to do that. As he then grabbed his sword, he would then infuse it with his Ryatsu as he would go to slice it down. Suddenly, something weird would happen. The hand of the White would then suddenly catch the sword. He was so confused. How did he manage to do that? And the thing is, it didn't even cut his hand. Suddenly, he would feel his hand bleeding, as he realized he had lost the battle of Ryatsu clashing, as he then suddenly was basically backhanded, as the hollow would then charge up a Sero. Suddenly, someone would appear in front of Shinji, making a zone of blood vein. Not a blood vein, but something like that, to pretty much protect Shinji from the attack. This being Masaki Kurosaki. She was one of the strongest Quincy's from the Kurosaki family, and she was the last of the family. She had been walking outside, and she came upon Shinji fighting. Obviously, she wouldn't know like he's a Shinigami, since he isn't in the attire. He is usually in the drippy outfit, or the hat and all, and the trench coats. It was fucking drippy. As Masaki would start shooting arrows at the hollow, as obviously when they come to that same showdown of pretty much Masaki opening her arms, as the hollow would bite her neck, as she would try to use blood vein to defend against the attack, or at least she thinks she would, as she would just shoot the hollow's head off. Obviously, Masaki would help Shinji up, as pretty much, I really like going over this. It kind of just embarrasses me, but obviously instead of Ishin, it'll just be Shinji. So like with the whole Masaki getting infected by the hollow, and Shinji and Ryukin this time would have that argument, until Urahara would appear telling Shinji that he has a way to save Masaki. So pretty much what would happen is, I'm gonna have several things happen. What would happen is Shinji having a hollow side already. What the procedure would happen is Shinji would just absorb White, as that's how Ichigo would get White, not from Masaki. It was simply from Shinji absorbing him. So Shinji would absorb the hollow, as his hollow mask would evolve to that of a Vasta Lorde. I assume all the Vizard masks were like at least at Huka's level, so now Shinji was that of a Vasta Lorde, and he has access to more hollow based abilities, making him exponentially stronger. As now, this is when obviously Shinji and Masaki would get like married and all, as they would have Ichigo. I I don't really know if I'll have like Karin and Yuzu. I don't really like that. I kind of just want to have Ichigo kind of do his own journey there, maybe in a different what if, but I don't know about this one. I'm just not feeling that. So if you're wondering, what will Ichigo look like? Will he have yellow hair? Will he still have his orange hair? Or will he have those weird teeth of Shinji or some shit like that? You're wondering. Obviously, I'm gonna have him have his usual yellow, like not usual. He'd give him like yellow hair and like the same visual features of Shinji with the weird teeth and shit. Obviously, somehow, some way, it would still look good on him. Like, come on, like ain't nothing wrong with that. Like, Shinji. No, I'm just kidding. But pretty much what would happen next is, Ichigo was raised in the warehouse. The first 9 years of his life, he had been trained in Hakuda by Kensei, Mashiro, and Lisa, and obviously occasionally thrown sandals at by Hiyori. He had then been trained by Kido by Urahara, Tessai, and Hachi, as he had been told by Urahara that if he wanted to make any Kido, he should just put his mind to it, he should come up with something. Obviously, Ichigo would take this to heart, as he would truly believe it. As obviously he would receive his Asuchi, as he would train with it, keep it safe, keep it near him, as he would want to bond with it, start to put more of his soul into it, as pretty much he'd be around, when he's about 9 years old, he'd be around just 20th seat. He's a kid, he's not gonna be too powerful, but what would happen is he would also be trained by Masaki with Quincy powers. She didn't have any reason to hide it from him. They literally were, Ichigo was being trained on it. So he learned more of the truth of who he was, like his heritage, how he was part Hollow, part Shinigami, and now part Quincy, as he'd started learning Quincy-based abilities, and soon he'll meet Old Man Zangetsu, and this time his other Zanpakuto. As what would happen is we'll do a time skip to the day of Masaki's death. Now, obviously, I know. I'm sad too, you're sad too. It is what it is. But pretty much the whole scene would happen where Masaki would get absorbed by Yuha and the Oswalin, as she didn't have time to use her blood vein to save Ichigo. So she ended up just being a body shield for Ichigo, as Ichigo would witness his mother being killed by the Grand Fisher. Obviously, Aizen would be watching this from afar. He'd be like, this is going just as I expected and shit, something like that. We never know Aizen. But pretty much what would happen is the whole attack would happen is Ichigo would be taking it hard. Obviously, he'd have people who would try to comfort him, but obviously he had still shut down and pretty much kind of did his own thing from there. He became his usual self, as he was sort of like a quote-unquote delinquent at that point, but he didn't really care what other people thought. He just wanted to be himself. So we'll do a time skip for 6 years. Ichigo had woke up that very same morning, and it was his first day of high school. He was very excited, to meet new people, and obviously he'd see his cousin was going there to that very same school. Obviously, if you're wondering, Ichigo knows like his relatives, yeah, of course. Masaki would take Ichigo a lot of times to the Ryuken's house, as him and Uryu would train together with Ryuken's father, or Uryu's uncle, as Ichigo would then been just as sad when he died, as he would have sort of had that same hatred towards Shinigami. Obviously, he was kind of unintentionally groomed to hate Shinigami due to the circumstances of his parents, obviously Shinji and the rest of the Vizard. He was kind of not groomed to hate them, but groomed to not really like them either. It's kind of hard to explain. Hate is a complicated emotion, but pretty much Ichigo would get up as he would put on his uniform, as he would head over to the school. Once he would get there, he'd meet Chad and Uryu and Orihime and Tatsuki and the other friends, as he would do the same clotheslining. He didn't actually develop the clotheslining yet. So what would happen is they come up with the same plan, where pretty much he'd tell Mizuru, hey, you can come up with an excuse why there's a bunch of like bloodied out delinquents here. As Mizuru would say, yeah, I can come up with that. It's pretty easy. As Ichigo would crack his knuckles out, he would throw off his bag, as he would say, good. As him and Uryu and Chad would start start laying the hands down, as they would start throwing hands with a bunch of other kids, obviously like delinquents and sort of like gangsters, like Yakuza at that point. Not Yakuza, but like kind of younger Yakuza. They're not like adults, they're just like teenagers in Japan, you know. Obviously Japan is very different from our usual westernized culture wherever you live. They have an interesting culture that is wonderful to learn. But aside from the tangents, after Ichigo would beat up like the delinquents, him, Uryu, Orihime, Chad, Mizuru, Tatsuki, just the rest of his friends would head into class, where they'd meet Miss Ochi. So Miss Ochi would introduce everyone to the first day of high school, or at least 9th grade, as Ichigo would went through the day. Now after school, it would have been the day of April 4th, that's, I believe, the first day of the anime. Ichigo's walking through and he'd see that same spirit. This time, now he can console her. This time he had been training all those, not a few months now, to be able to use the console. He'd kind of fuck up a little bit, accidentally send this few souls to hell. You'd be like, that's my bad. I'm just kidding. I don't think you can actually like accidentally send someone to hell. That's just not possible. But Ichigo would console her, as obviously he'd tell her that he would but he would try to find a hollow who was planning on, you know, eating her, which would be Fishbone D. So Ichigo was going through the, day, as once he would got back to the warehouse, he'd be pretty much met up with Shinji, Hiyori, and the rest of the Vizards, as obviously every time he had came back home, he had been sandal had mark would be implanted on his face due to Hiyori throwing her sandal. Obviously Shinji would tell Ichigo that today was the day that he went on his first day of hollow hunting. Ichigo's kind of excited, a little scared, and a little nervous. You know, he has never done hollow hunting, only heard stories and myths from his parents. As now, he was truly ready to kill hollows. Now, Ichigo would get on his drip, you know, he kind of wears something similar to of his father, as he would have like a uniform, and then he would have on the trench coats with like the tie on, and it is like his kind of like his weird smile showing. So he has like a smile like Shinra at that point, or like Shinji. But Ichigo would then head out, obviously for wedding. Does anyone go with him? He invited Uryu to come along. Obviously he knows like how Uryu pretty much quote unquote erases. You don't actually erase hollows, you simply eliminate them, or not eliminate them, but send them to Yuha. Any hollow you kill, any Shinigami you kill, it goes straight to Yuha and it's absorbed. So yeah, that's kind of how it works, but it was simply misconcepted. So him and Uryu would go hollow hunting when they'd come upon Fishbone D and Rukia Kuchiki, who was having trouble defeating the hollow. Obviously Rukia was injured, as Ichigo and Uryu would pull up. Ichigo would have his sword on his shoulder, as he'd be like, yada yada. No, I'm just kidding. He's like yada yada kokedana. But pretty much he'd pull up to the scene, as he would say, oh, nice to meet you, Shinigami. What's your name? So obviously Rukia would be like, Rukia Kuchiki. As Ichigo would be like, oh, from the Kuchiki family. That's cool. As he would look down at her, as he would say, I assume you need some help. Don't worry, we'll deal with it. As he would then suddenly appear behind the hollow, as suddenly there'd be a huge gash throughout, like the whole vertically throughout the middle of his body, through his head all the way down to his midsection, as he was suddenly cut in half. Ichigo would then unsheath the sword, as he would then say, see, I told you, that was easy work. As the hollow would then disintegrate into reishi dust, as it would then fly off into the distance, purified and free. Obviously being sent to Soul Society, unless the the hollow had committed atrocities throughout his human life, not the hollow life, human life, then it would be sent to hell. As after Ichigo would say Rukia, he would help her up, as he would ask Rukia what company she's from. Obviously Rukia would then answer, yeah, I'm from the 13th division, as Ichigo would say, oh, Ukitage's division, he's a very nice man, hopefully I'll be able to meet him one day. As Rukia would be like, who knows? As Ichigo would say, so what's your training here, or your mission here? As Rukia then say, yeah, this place is a highly Ryatsu based town, as obviously there would be multiple hollows here who would want to eat humans who have high Ryatsu. Obviously there was some sensing of hollow like reishi here, as, by the way, weird tangent, but if you're wondering what happened to Ishin, so pretty much what would happen is Ishin would not defect, but about like 10 years later he would retire. He had been captain for a while, as that's how Toshiro would take over and be captain, with Rangiko still being lieutenant. So like Ishin would just be chilling in like the Shiba household, so whenever Ichigo would go save Rukia, that's kind of what would happen. So what would happen is Ichigo, Uryu, and Rukia, they'd start becoming friends and all. As if you're wondering, wait, how does like Rukia get arrested and all? The reason why she gets arrested this time is simply because she was associated with a bunch of traitors. So obviously, it's almost like aiding and abetting at that point. And obviously, Aizen wanted to use this as his plan, and then would lure Ichigo and his friends to Soul Society. As this time, Urahara would still put the Hokyoku in Rukia. Basically killing her Ryatsu, slowly turning her into a human. Obviously, this is when Renji and Byakuya would come along, and yeah, that's kind of what would happen. So I'm gonna do a pretty fucking long time skip, probably until the time when Ichigo and Uryu have like a friendly competition. Now we'll time skip directly to that. Ichigo in this time had been so close to getting Shikai. He's been slicing down as much hollows as he can. He's feeling it. He's so close to getting it. He feels like there's just one more thing. As what would happen, pretty much Uryu had said, let's have a competition, Shinigami and Quincy. As Ichigo would then suddenly scratch his head, as he would say, you know, Uryu, I'm still technically part Quincy. This is like Quincy versus hybrid at this point. It wouldn't be fair for you. As Uryu would said, it doesn't matter what fucking blood you have, I'm still gonna win. Obviously, he wouldn't say in that language, but obviously he would say in some stoic and pretty formal language, as he would suddenly push his glasses up, as he would be like the know-it-all. Not that I don't like Uryu, it's just that's how it'd be like. He'd have that light glimmering over his glasses, as he'd be like, I know it all. But enough of the tangents. Pretty much today would start the competition. It would crush the hollow bay as the dust would fall over, as suddenly a bunch of gargantas would start opening, as flocks of dozens of hollows would start coming in, as Ichigo would summon his sword, as he would then put it onto his shoulder, as he would do the same quote, yada yada kokedana. Obviously, I actually don't know. I know yada yada means like good grief, but I don't actually remember kokedana means. It's something that Aizen says. But pretty much the hollows would start going into Soul Society. What am I saying? Fuck. We would go like forming onto the streets of Karakura town, as Uryu would summon his bow. But this time, Uryu's gonna be much stronger. Due to having Ichigo there constantly training with him, he'd have a goal he'd want to reach up to. So let's say he'd use the samurai glove one day, as he would sort of, I'm basically having it where he gets his Volstagg a little bit early, but I'm not going to do it yet. So he has the samurai glove, he's using it. As soon I'm going to have that Uryu uses the samurai glove when Byakuya and Renji come along, then he'd like lose it, his Quincy powers quote unquote, then he'd get his Volstagg and then he'd go with Ichigo. That seems more reasonable. Uryu would be more powerful and a little more helpful during the invasion. As we go back to the present time, as a bunch of hollows were coming in, as Ichigo and Uryu would start slicing down, counting out loud. Ichigo being at like 235, while Uryu was at like 186. They were pretty close to each other. As Uryu would do something major that would raise his numbers. He would make a bow, as about 200 arrows would come in, and a bunch of stupid hollows were walking into the arrows. So this got him about like 200, maybe 150 hollows exterminated, as Ichigo would be like, nah, come on, Uryu, that was luck. He'd be like, I need to catch up. As suddenly he'd think of something. He had remembered the Kido that Urahara had used on him once. It was really painful to recover as well. Like he had to pop a bunch of kind of like pseudo version of Senza beads after that. But Ichigo would then start to go through some incantations, as he would then raise his finger in the air, as a sort of blue Ryatsu, kind of yellow Ryatsu, would surround him, as he would then say, Hado no Kyuju, Kukuro Hitsuki, as a huge black cube would form around all the hollows, as all you would hear is scraping metal on metal, as your ears would cringe when you'd hear it. But once the Kido technique would fall, you would just see all the hollows just like disintegrating. Now pretty much there would be a warping hole opening in the space itself. Once they would see this, they would see a huge ass Menoscar there, a Gillian coming out, as Urahara would be like, oh, that Gillian's looking quite mad. Mr. Kurosaki, do you care to handle this? As Ichigo would say, of course, Mr. Urahara, I got you. Or should I say, hat and clogs. As pretty much Urahara would be like, come on Ichigo, you know it's Kisuke, you don't gotta be formal with me, I'm basically like your uncle now. As Ichigo would then say, yeah, a crazy uncle, but an uncle nonetheless. As he then appeared in front of Gillian, as he then sliced down. He remembered a technique that old man Zangetsu had taught him. He had remembered. We flash back to the day Ichigo had met old man Zangetsu. He was meditating, trying to reach his Zanpakuto, but he had met someone else. As he sensed the Ryatsu, as he felt familiar. As he'd been versed in Quincy history, he would have known of the Quincy King and what he looked like, or at least envisioned it at least. As Ichigo would question, are you Yuhabach? As old man Zangetsu would say, I'm neither Yuhabach nor am I. I'm simply a representation of the Quincy Reishi that resides inside of you. As Ichigo would then say, so you can teach me Quincy techniques? As he'd get a little excited, as an old man Zangetsu would nod his head. Ichigo would kind of be a bit excited. None of the other Quincy's had someone to help them do their Quincy techniques. They just did it all on their own. So if Ichigo had a bit of guidance from Yuhabach himself, or at least a reminiscence of Yuhabach, he'd be fine. He'd learn a lot. And this is when Ichigo would learn Getsuga Tensho. It's not because it's a Shinigami technique, but this time it'll be more of a Quincy technique. As when he ever used his Hollow Mask, it'll turn red, just like it did in canon. Obviously, maybe when it came to the 1,000-Year Blood Arc, it might turn yellow, because in the manga panels it was yellow, but nonetheless, we go back to the present time. Ichigo would then slice down his blade as a huge blue wave of like an arc of Ryatsu would escape from his blade, as he would then say, Getsuga Tensho. As a huge blue wave would come out of his blade. A huge blue wave would come out of his blade. That sounds. Did that rhyme? I'm not sure. But pretty much this Getsuga Tensho would slice right through the hollow. So for a few seconds, the earth itself would start to tremor a little bit, but it was just not really something humans noticed. It was just something only Shinigami, like Lieutenant Class and up, could feel. Obviously, this means all the people in Soul Society felt that, as they'd send officers down there, obviously to also bring back Rukia Kuchiki, as they felt that presence. It was linked to Shinji Hirako, and Shinji Hirako was exiled, or at least Urahara was, and then Urahara helped them leave, so that means they were exiled too, and that means Rukia aiding and abetting, and that means she was going to be executed by Central 46 because Aizen had assassinated them, which then led to Aizen basically sending Byakuya and Renji to go arrest Rukia and possibly eliminate the rest of her new quote-unquote friend group. As, yeah, pretty much, yeah, that would happen. And that'll be where I'm leaving off this part of What If Ichigo Was Shinji's Son. This series should go about like maybe 5 parts, and each part should be like around relatively 30, maybe 40 minutes. But without further ado, guys, I hope you guys have a good night or day or whatever the fuck time it is. I don't care. But like I said, have a good day.